Radical expressions, question 2. Rationalize denominator. 5 divided by square root 2 minus square root 3. Now when we are trying to rationalize, then we are basically trying to get rid of the radical terms, here the square root terms, from the denominator. And the way to do it is to multiply and divide by its conjugate. So what I'm trying to say is that we have this expression 5 over square root 2 minus square root 3, right? Now we want to get rid of square roots from this denominator. So we can do that by multiplying and dividing by the conjugate of this number. And the conjugate is square root 2 plus square root 3. So we'll multiply and divide by the same term, square root 2 plus square root 3. Now, square root 2 plus square root 3 divided by square root 2 plus square root 3 is like multiplying by 1, right? It's kind of 1. So when you write any expression and multiply by 1, you get the same expression. So this is equal to this, correct? But it makes a major change, and the change is, now, look at it. In the numerator, we get 5 times square root 2 plus square root 3, but in the denominator, when these two terms get multiplied, we get what? Let's expand. So we get, let me write here as square root 2 minus square root 3 times square root 2 plus square root 3, right? So when you do this, a minus b times a plus b, what you get is a squared minus b squared. So effectively, you get in the denominator 2 minus 3, right? We get 2 minus 3. And the numerator we can expand, we get 5 square root 2 plus 5 square root 3. Now 2 minus 3 is minus 1, right? So we can write this as minus of 5 square root 2 plus 5 square root 3, right? Which is minus 5 square root 2 minus 5 square root 3. So that is the final answer. Now let me show, some of my students really get confused with this particular step. So what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to apply the distributive property and show the complete multiplication process. So I will do this here so that you understand why we get this, right? We basically use the formula a plus b times a minus b is equals to a squared minus b squared, right? But we'll do it with radicals and show you exactly what happens. So it is square root 2 minus square root 3 times square root 2 plus square root 3, right? So when you multiply square root 2 by square root 2, you get square root 4, right? So let me first write square root 4 here. Then square root 2 times square root 3 will give me plus square root of 6. Now minus times plus is minus, and 3 times 2 is 6, so it's minus square root 6. Minus times plus is minus, and 3 times 3 is 9, so we get square root of 9, correct? Now square root of 4 is equal to 2, and square root 6 minus square root 6 is 0, so I can write 0 here, right? Minus square root of 9 is 3. Do you see we get 2 minus 3? Do you see that? 2 minus 3. Effectively, if you do this, then what we get is square root 2 square minus square root 3 square. And square of square root 2 is 2, square of square root 3 is 3. That is why we get 2 minus 3, which is minus 1. And that's why we multiplied by this minus 1 here. Hope this process is extremely clear to you, because we are going to use this now onwards without explaining you this particular thing, right? Remember, a plus b times a minus b is a squared minus b squared, and square of a square root is the number itself, correct? That will help you to understand. Thank you and all the best.